The other vivid memory I had was another pillbox. I was trying to get to it and couldn't. Every time I would start, he would get too close for comfort, and I'd back out. And so I crawled around out of his sight and over up to the pillbox, went up the side, got up on top of the pillbox, and here was a pipe just about the size of a flamethrower nozzle. So somebody said there were 17 in there. I don't know. I have no idea. But I got that one, knocked that one out. When the other one I approached, apparently they ran out of ammunition. That's the only thing I can figure. But I was getting close enough that I could get my flame into the pillbox, and they came charging. There were 5 or 6, or whatever when the flame hit them. They stopped 'cause it just took all the oxygen out of the air, and they just fell over. On February 23, 1945, a 21-year-old Marine named Woody Williams strapped on a weapon that weighed more than he did. Over the next 4 hours, he would destroy 7 Japanese pillboxes on Iwo Jima, often crawling within feet of enemy machine gun positions while carrying 4 gallons of burning napalm on his back. 20 years later, the same weapon would become the most controversial tool of the Vietnam War. A weapon that burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A weapon that killed not just with fire, but with suffocation, poison gas, and cardiac arrest. A weapon so horrifying that its imagery helped turn an entire nation against the war. The M9A1-7 looked like a death sentence strapped to your back. 50 pounds of fuel, compressed nitrogen, and napalm-thickened gasoline. The fuel tank held about 4 gallons, enough for 7 or 8 seconds of continuous fire. That's not a typo. Your entire combat capability lasted less time than it takes to read music, this paragraph. The effective range was roughly 40 m, about 130 feet, just far enough that the enemy could see you coming. Just close enough that you'd feel the heat reflecting back on your own face. The burning fuel reached temperatures up to 2,190 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, steel melts at 2,500 degrees. Flesh doesn't stand a chance. But the flamethrower wasn't just a fire delivery system. It was an engineering marvel of terror. The M9A1-7 featured a 5-shot revolver-style ignition system, waterproof and reliable even in the monsoon-soaked jungles of Vietnam. This was an improvement over the World War II M2 model, which could leave operators stranded with unignitable fuel. Engineers added quick-release shoulder buckles so operators could ditch the weapon in seconds. Because here's the thing about carrying 4 gallons of napalm into combat. 1 bullet to your music, propellant tank, and you become the explosion. Marine Corps records from Iwo Jima showed that flamethrower units took 92% casualties. The weapon that made them effective also made them the primary target of every enemy soldier within visual range. But the portable flamethrower was just the beginning. The U.S. military had something far more terrifying waiting in the motor pool. The M67 flame tank could carry 398 gallons of napalm, nearly 100 times the capacity of the portable unit. Its M6 flame gun was disguised to look like a standard 90mm cannon, so enemy soldiers wouldn't know what was coming until the first jet of liquid fire hit their position. Range, 280 yards. Burn time, a full minute of continuous fire. Only 109 minutes and 67 seconds were ever produced. All of them operated by the Marine Corps, and all of them would see action in Vietnam. The flamethrower earned its reputation in the Pacific. Iwo Jima was an island fortress. 11 miles of tunnel connected 1,500 fortified positions, machine guns, artillery, and 21,000 Japanese soldiers who had no intention of surrendering. American commanders deployed 485 flamethrowers and 8 Sherman flame tanks. They burned through 10,000 gallons of napalm every single day. On February the 23rd, 1945, Corporal Herschel Williams spent 4 hours destroying 7 Japanese pillboxes with his flamethrower. He went through 6 complete flamethrower units while his 4-man cover team was killed around him. He earned the Medal of Honor. He also earned something else. Memories he couldn't access for decades. Williams described combat dissociation, a psychological phenomenon where the mind blocks traumatic memories as they happen. Music. He struggled with what he called survivor's guilt until a religious awakening in 1962, 17 years after the battle. Music. When Marines landed at Da Nang in March 1965, M67 flame tanks were among the first U.S. ground combat vehicles in Vietnam. The military believed flamethrowers would be just music, as effective against Viet Cong tunnel networks as they had been against Japanese bunkers. They were wrong, but they wouldn't figure that out for years. The Cu-Chi tunnel system stretched for 250 kilometers, underground hospitals, barracks, weapons factories, and command centers. Flamethrowers could clear an entrance, but the tunnels were too deep and too interconnected to destroy with fire alone. The Americans would need a different solution for the tunnels. Small soldiers called tunnel rats, who would crawl inside with pistols and flashlights. But in the open jungle against villages and fortified positions, the flamethrower remained the weapon of choice, and the operations were about to begin. Operation Starlight was the M67's combat debut. 3 flame tanks rolled with the 7th Marines toward Van Tuong Peninsula, hunting a Viet Cong regiment that had been terrorizing the region. On August 18th, a resupply convoy carrying an M67 section drove straight into a VC ambush. The Marines were pinned down, taking fire from 3 sides. The flame tanks responded. 280 yards of liquid fire cutting through the jungle. The VC regiment scattered. The result, 614 Viet Cong killed, 45 Marines killed, 203 wounded. But Starlight, music, was just the opening act. Operation Cedar Falls deployed 30,000 American troops into the Iron Triangle, the most heavily fortified Viet Cong territory in South Vietnam. The mission, find and destroy the VC's underground headquarters. M132 armored flamethrowers led the assault. They burned fields to expose tunnel entrances. They incinerated bunker complexes. They turned the jungle into an inferno. On January 18th, tunnel rats discovered something extraordinary. The Viet Cong's music district headquarters at Cu-Chi inside. They found 491,553 pages, music, of documents, maps, and intelligence. 700 Viet Cong killed, 1,100 bunkers destroyed, 400 tunnels cleared. The Tet Offensive changed everything. On January 31st, 1968, North Vietnamese forces launched simultaneous attacks across South Vietnam. In Hue, the ancient imperial capital, 10,000 NVA and VC soldiers seized control of the city. M67 flame tanks F-32 and F-33 were the first American armor inside Hue's walls. In urban combat, the flamethrower proved devastatingly effective. Liquid fire could reach around corners, into windows, through doorways. But commanders limited flame weapon use inside Hue. The city was filled with civilians. The collateral damage would be broadcast on television sets across America. In the Mekong Delta, the military tried something unprecedented. Flamethrowers on boats. M132 units fired from armored troop carriers. Modified landing craft called Zippo boats carried dual Army flame turrets up jungle waterways. No enemy in history had faced flame attacks from water before. But the weapon that won battles was losing something else entirely. The war for American hearts and minds. Here's what the military reports don't show you. A 2020 study published in Military Medical Research examined declassified records of flamethrower casualties from World War II forward. The findings were worse than music anyone publicly acknowledged. Standard medical terminology recognizes 3 degrees of burns. Flamethrower wounds reached 4th and 5th degree, destroying skin, muscle, tendon, nerve, blood vessels, and bone. Napalm B, the Vietnam-era formula, mixed polystyrene, benzene, and gasoline into a gel that stuck to whatever it touched. Water couldn't rinse it off. Wiping it spread the fire. Victims could only watch as the burning continued. But here's the part that changes everything you think you know about this weapon. Most flamethrower victims didn't die from burns. Burning napalm consumes oxygen and produces carbon monoxide at concentrations reaching 20% near the flame source. In enclosed spaces like bunkers and tunnels, victims suffocated before the fire ever reached them. A declassified World War II case study documented 4 civilian women found dead in a Saipan cave. No external burns. Cause of death, respiratory failure from inhaling fuel irritants. The flame never touched them. When napalm B burned, it released styrene gas, now music, classified as a likely human carcinogen and confirmed neurotoxin. On June 8, 1972, 9-year-old Phan Thi Kim Phuc, ran screaming down a road near Trang Bang village. A South Vietnamese Air Force napalm strike had hit her village. Nikut's photograph captured the moment that would define the war. She suffered third-degree burns across 30 to 35% of her body. She spent 14 months in hospitals. She underwent 17 surgeries. The scar tissue that replaced her skin lacks sweat glands, meaning she cannot regulate her body temperature naturally. 50 years later, in 2022, she was still receiving laser treatments for pain management. The photograph was published on the front page of the New York Times the next day. It won the 1973 Pulitzer Prize, and it helped end a war. The men who used the flamethrower paid a different price than their victims. Research into moral injury, the psychological damage from violating one's own moral code, music, applies directly to flamethrower operators. These men had to watch their targets burn. They had to hear the screaming. They had to smell to hear the screaming. They had to smell the results. Platoon Sergeant Charles Brown served with the infantry at Hill 875 in November 1967. In his testimony, he described watching a fellow soldier die when enemy fire struck his flamethrower's pressure tanks. The man became a fireball in front of his entire platoon. Many operators reported being avoided by their own comrades. The weapon was too brutal, too final. Even soldiers hardened to rifle and artillery fire drew a line at setting people on fire. Woody Williams spoke openly about his psychological struggle. Despite earning the Medal of Honor, he couldn't access his combat memories for decades. He described the experience as just a blank and only found peace through religious conversion in 1962, 17 years after Iwo Jima. Williams died on June 29, 2022, at 98 years old. He was the last living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. To the end, he advocated for veterans' mental health services. The military never officially calculated psychological casualty rates for flamethrower units, but the physical numbers tell their own story. 92% casualties at Iwo Jima. Operators who survived combat often couldn't survive the memories. In January 1967, Ramparts magazine published something Americans had never seen before: color photographs of Vietnamese children mutilated by napalm. The images helped convince Martin Luther King Jr. to publicly oppose the Vietnam War. 3 months later, King delivered his Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church in New York City. This business of burning human beings with napalm cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. Dow Chemical became the face of American atrocity. After 1965, they were the Pentagon's sole supplier of napalm B. Protesters targeted their campus recruiters nationwide. On October 18, 1967, students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison blockaded Dow Chemical recruiters inside the Commerce Building. When police moved in with billy clubs and tear gas, 47 students and 19 officers were hospitalized. It was the first violent campus protest of the Vietnam War era. Over the next 2 years, more than 100 campuses held anti-Dow demonstrations. In June 1969, Dow quietly terminated its napalm contract with the Pentagon. When Nikut's photograph hit American newspapers, on June 9, 1972, it crystallized something that polls already showed. 61% of Americans believed Vietnam was a mistake. President Nixon, recorded on White House tapes, questioned whether the photograph was staged. It wasn't. But his reaction revealed how desperate the administration had become to control the narrative around America's most controversial weapon. In 1978, 5 years before international law would restrict incendiary weapons, the Pentagon made a quiet decision: retire every flamethrower in the American arsenal. The official reasons were tactical. The weapons were heavy, short-ranged, and dangerous to their operators. Soldiers often abandoned portable flamethrowers on long patrols rather than carry the extra weight. But the real reason was simpler. Charles Crone, author of The Lost Battalion of Tet, put it bluntly: setting people on fire seemed unnecessarily cruel. It was an emotional reaction rather than practical. The military developed a replacement, the M202A1 flash rocket launcher, a 4-round incendiary weapon with a 750 m range, 5 times the distance of a portable flamethrower. But the flash had problems of its own: spontaneous ignition during loading, volatile chemical leaks, a 15 m backblast danger zone. Training ceased in the mid-1980s. It was never fired in combat. Today, no American military unit operates dedicated flame weapons. The age of the flamethrower, from the trenches of World War I to the jungles of Vietnam, is over. The images remain. The flamethrower was designed to win battles. It succeeded, but it also created images that lost wars, testimonies that haunt survivors, and questions that military ethicists still debate today. Some weapons are too effective for their own good. If you want to understand how the Vietnam War shaped modern military ethics, click the video on screen. Subscribe for more military history.